I am very, very fortunate here with the three people I have to talk to on this panel. As Dave said, we've had a look at how we've got to where we are today through the day. And this is about how do we look forward to, in particular from an Australian perspective, next year's National Defence Strategy. How do we shape it? What do we need to be looking at, concerned about, and where perhaps are the opportunities? With me are three excellent people providing an Australian, Philippines and Ukrainian perspective. Rachel Noble most recently served as the Director General of the Australian Signals Directorate, as well as previously being the head of ASD's Australian Cybersecurity Centre. Prior to this, she held senior leadership roles across many national security and policy agencies, including the Department of Home Affairs, Department of Immigration and Border Protection. And too many years ago now, she was my boss in PM&C. Vasyl Myroshnychenko is Ukraine's ambassador to Australia and New Zealand, and an advisor to Ukraine's Minister for Defence. A former strategic communications expert and civil society leader, he co-founded the Ukraine Crisis Media Centre and served on the board of the Ukrainian Institute. And General Emmanuel Bautista. Manny, great to have you here in Australia. Manny served as the 44th Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and later held roles in the Philippines government, including Under Secretary at the Office of the President. He led national task forces on security, peace and the West Philippine Sea, and was part of the Philippines legal team in the South China Sea arbitration, for which I think the rest of the world is very grateful for that ruling. So it is a really fabulous discussion. As we look forward to the 2026 National Defence Strategy, just very quickly looking back, I think it's the first time in many, many years in which such a strategy will be developed in times of instability. If you have a look at 2009, 2013, 2016 and 2020 white papers and documents, all of those were in a context of relative international peace. Yes, we had terrorism through all those years, but we did not have the state-on-state conflict, and we really didn't quite have the daily cyber and digital threats that we really do face now. So as we look to the 2026 National Defence Strategy, it's not so much how do we maintain peace and stability, it's how do we regain it. And some make the mistake, in my view, of thinking that we're pretty lucky here in our region that we don't yet have a hot war, as obviously there is in Europe and the Middle East. But Europe thought that too, right up until February 2022. And while we tend to say that China is learning from Russia's successes and failures in Europe, we must not limit ourselves to mere onlookers. We need to learn from that theatre, as well as the growing tensions in the Indo-Pacific, which is why it is such a pleasure to have the three of you here today. So to get straight into the questions, and Rachel, let's start with you. You were in leadership roles, including, of course, at Home Affairs, ASD, PM&C, as well as on the Secretary's Committee on National Security, as the global and regional security environment went from relative peace to one that was deteriorating. Can you take us through how not a secure and peaceful environment, but an insecure environment has reshaped Australia's threat perception, and how you think this might and should inform next year's defence strategy?
Thanks, Justin, and thanks for having me here. And I feel very honoured to be here with you, General and Ambassador. I'll talk about the bits that I know best about. And I think what's really changed, even in the last 12 to 18 months for us, is really cyber threats. And we've seen, firstly, a merging of the activities of both criminals and state actors, which is not something that we would have seen, even 3 years ago. And we certainly saw that at the beginning of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, where cyber criminals took sides in that war. And it was incredibly murky and very hard to understand whether those criminals were sanctioned by the state, those criminals took sort of implied instructions from the state, or they were just doing a side hustle, because we all know government doesn't pay that well. So that space has become murky. I think the really big deal, though, in the last 12 months is that the People's Republic of China has been publicly outed, particularly by the leadership in the United States, for pre-positioning on privately owned critical infrastructure for the purpose of degrading, destroying that critical infrastructure and harming or killing civilians. So if we sort of go back not that far and think about our own ideas about what conflict looks like or what a war would look like, most of us would believe that would be a step too far, a bridge too far. And so here we are with that very activity occurring in cyberspace, and the Americans have been unbelievably forward-leaning in talking about finding the PRC on their water, their energy, their telcos. And the bad thing about that is that in the cyber world, we give them cool names like Volt Typhoon, and it kind of doesn't help. I think the second big piece for me is that is changing at an incredible pace. Some people call it emerging technology. I call it not so emerging technology, because it really is already here. So artificial intelligence, quantum computing, so close. We now finally have a quantum resistant crypt standard, which is exciting. Nanotechnology, what's happening in space. These are areas that are moving at incredible speed, and there are capabilities available to us for both good and for evil, for both sides. And I think we really need to see our leaders be unafraid of that technology, really engage with it, understand it, and then work out how we can embrace it to protect ourselves from the threats that have emerged.
Excellent. Let me just stick with you for a moment, because I think many people in this room might be aware of it, but a lot won't be. The outing, the reporting of China pre-positioning on critical infrastructure, including throughout the Five Eyes, is what you're saying there, that effectively, even though the intent may not be to do anything now with it, that if anyone thinks that a future conflict might be credible, that China is effectively pre-positioned to disrupt a whole of society critical infrastructure, either ahead of or during a conflict.
That's exactly how we understand their intent. Yeah. And so I guess it's the other thing to sort of appreciate about it is it's extremely hard to detect, and perhaps we'll come to it later in our conversation, but we will not be successful in detecting it without the government and the private sector working as one. And they call it living off the land. What that means is that if you leave a little bit of cyber dynamite under the bridge, unlike traditional espionage where you're taking data in and out all the time because you're stealing the information, you only need to come back once or twice a year to check the dynamite's still good. I don't know what the dynamite equivalent of that is, but it's still good, which means there's not much going on your network to see, and it's usually accessed by legitimate logins and passwords. So without the assistance of a private company, say, who says, Justin Bassi's a really hard worker, but he's not normally logging on at 2 a.m. on a Monday, so something's fishy there. It's extremely hard to detect. That's what makes it so lethal.
Hard to detect, lethal, and should be quite scary for people and hard for decision makers. Vasyl, let me turn to you, Ambassador. And in terms of the digital side that Rachel just took us through, firstly, congratulations for what Ukraine has done in the last few days using drones, the way that you have with Operation Spiderweb, and also what we saw in terms of perhaps Rachel's used the word dynamite with the bridge. A lot has been happening. No doubt, on a daily basis, you are told how much pride people have with Ukraine and Ukrainian people for the remarkable resilience that the Ukrainian people have. Obviously, a theme at this conference being preparation and resilience. and that resilience has come through since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. But I've also heard you say to many people, very politely, that Russia's invasion didn't start in February 2022, that it started with the takeover in Crimea in 2014. Can you maybe take us through, in terms of that preparation and resilience side, what the effort Ukraine went through after Russia's invasion and takeover of Crimea in 2014 to build up a comprehensive or a total defence plan, how important those years of preparation were so that you were both ready and resilient in February 2022?
Well, thank you, Justin, and thanks a lot for wearing a Ukrainian tie. I was thinking about how could I support ASPI, how could support ASPI conference, and here you go, over the weekend, you see, deliver it. Lots of attention to that. I had a very difficult night. My night was disrupted, and it was not because of the ballistic missiles or Shahed drones flying over Canberra. It was something more banal. Our foreign minister convened all ambassadors at 2 o'clock in the morning, and as you all know here in this room, nobody cares about time zone in Australia. And I had a fun night until 3, on the call with all the ambassadors. And part of that briefing was related to the most latest Istanbul talks with the Russians, but that's a separate topic. Happy to share with you some of my insights responding to other questions. Question on resilience, and that was a very good panel we had at the beginning, because you all know the list of NATO resilience, right? I mean, there is kind of NATO guidelines on resilience. You can Google it, find it. I'm sure many of you here in the room know it very well. So when Russia invaded Georgia, right, and we all kind of watched of how Russia did it, very quickly 20% of the Georgian territory was occupied, right? And pretty much nobody really cared. Sarkozy tried to do something, but then everybody gave up. Everybody blamed Misha that he did it himself, and he had to pay the price. Right? I'm just being a bit provocative here, but this is what happened, right? And then, reset policy in America happened. Reset on Russia happened, and Putin thought, oh, well, I invaded 20% of the Georgian territory, and Americans want to have a good relationship with me. This is good. I should probably invade Ukraine. And he did in 2014. Firstly, he, of course, on the way while doing it, he killed 38 Australians on board of MH17, as well as 298, Dutch and Malaysians and others, and still has to pay a price for it. But as you know, there is an indictment of the Dutch court, but that's not enough. There is now a case within International Civil Aviation Authority in Montreal. So we hope that Australian government and Dutch government will keep Russia accountable for what they've done to the Australian citizens. Now, how did we build that resilience? Because it's a good topic. I wouldn't say that we did a great job. We could have done better, because you can always do better, especially in the retrospect. But I think those 8 years were crucial for Ukraine to build that resilience. And the reason I've commented in the initial panel, it was not about the government. It was about Ukraine's civil society, Ukraine's military. Well, military, of course, to a lot of extent was driven by the government. And of course, the support we got from our international partners. So our troops were trained in an Interflex program, which was UK, Canada, US was involved. So the training of soldiers started in 2014. A lot of the NATO capabilities were deployed, and the training started. The war started 2014. Heavy casualties in Ilovaisk, heavy casualties in Debaltsevo. You remember those Minsk I, Minsk II negotiations, then another 250 rounds of negotiations, and then Russia used those 8 years to beef up their military. The price of oil was very enabling to them. They used the money they made on oil and invested into their army, into their defense capabilities. And then they saw what was happening in 2022, 21 actually, and they thought, oh, it's good timing. So we're just going to invade Ukraine, and it will be a fait accompli. 7 days later, everybody will just accept, Ukraine being occupied by Russia entirely. But I think Ukrainian society has changed, and the reason it's changed because, in a way, it was a response of the Ukrainian civil society to the war in 2014. And I made a humble contribution to that by becoming a co-founder of that Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And I want to use it as an example because there were many other similar organizations which were set up in 2014 following the Revolution of Dignity. As you know, a pro-Russian leader, Yanukovych, ordered the assassination of 120 people. Actually, we don't know if he ordered that. Those were perhaps Russian operatives. We don't really know who shot down those people at Maidan who were protesting. But 120 people were shot dead at, imagine Martin Place in Sydney. People protesting, and there are some snipers on the roof of Fullerton Hotel just shooting down people in their eyes and in their, basically, throats. Men, women, kids, doesn't matter. So everybody was like shot dead. And then, Yanukovych fled, and Putin thought it was a good opportunity to invade Crimea, to invade the east of Ukraine, start the war. But this is where Ukrainian civil society, and I was part of it, I was a business leader, I was also in civil society with that. We thought, the government was like interim government, our speaker became a president. We had parliament elected a new prime minister, and we had to figure out how to deal with Russian disinformation. And Russian disinformation was so prevalent, you cannot even imagine it. And it was interesting, so we set up multilingual news outfit called Ukraine Crisis Media Center, many communications professionals involved, and our job, we pitched it to the government and said, look, we can assist you with comms, right? We all come from private sector, we all understand how comms work. You in the government, you don't really know, especially in today's new technology, how to use Twitter, how to use social media. It was 2014, it was still kind of early days. Many governments were not even adopting Twitter in those days, right? 11 years ago. I'm not sure when you started using Twitter in the government.
Last year, yeah.
Correct, yeah. So in a way, and then we set it up, and it's all on YouTube. You can watch it live. And all of a sudden, we rolled out a big operation, which was kind of a news agency amplifying Ukraine's voice, by the way, primarily funded by the US government, for which I'm very thankful. So US Embassy put in all the money into that center, initially supported by George Soros, but then US government came, German government, Swedish government, pretty much most of European governments, a little bit of money from NATO, Ukrainian diaspora. So it was all funded not by the Ukrainian government, it was all funded by foreign governments, primarily driven by American government. And we started doing these trainings to people in the offices of different ministers of how to do comms, how to communicate domestically, how to communicate internationally. So it was a big operation, 50 people full time. And then I remember that day on the 17th of July, Russians shoot down MH17. And that was a turning point in Australia as well as in Southeast Asia. Because all of a sudden, a war it was not even a war, people had no clue what was going on there, right? Most of the people, you in the room knew what was happening, but generally nobody cared until Russians shot down the plane. And that was an interesting kind of, all of a sudden, 2 days later, we have media from all over the world, from Malaysia, from China, from Indonesia, from Australia. We've never seen that media in Ukraine ever, right? And I remember when your foreign minister, Julia Bishop, came to Ukraine, I moderated her press conference at that Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And in a way, that was quite extraordinary that all of a sudden, Ukraine popped up on the Australian on the world map of Australia, in a way, and that's how it started. So, but we built our resilience in disinformation, fighting disinformation, in hybrid warfare threats, and then we actually went on a tour to Europe to tell Europeans what Russians are doing in Ukraine. Very interesting observations. So everybody in the Baltics and Eastern Europe and Central Europe, they all knew what we were talking about. As soon as we got further west, like Berlin, Brussels, Rome, London, London was good actually, by the way, but Berlin, Paris, Brussels, they said, oh, look, you're so vulnerable, you're just on the border. We are not vulnerable. You just, it's your problem. It's not our problem. Interestingly enough, how it all turned, was, whatever happened in 2016, then we've seen elections in America, when we see like how Russians are now intervening into any country and they can undermine any democracy together with China by using the weaknesses of a democratic system of free media, free society, and freedom of speech to undermine any democracy.
So, Vasyl, let me ask you might be a provocative question, it might be an ignorant question, but everything you're saying there, what you learned then from 2014 and everything that you went through, do you think if Putin attempted in 2014 what he did in February of 2022, that in 2014 Russia would have been successful?
I agree. If Russians were at the same scale they were at 2022, I mean, we wouldn't be able to withstand it. The thing is that Russia was weaker, Russia was not fully prepared, and I think it was very opportunistic, and it was the decision of Vladimir Putin to intervene in Crimea. I'm not sure how many students of Russia are here, or experts on Russia, let's put it this way. Certainly not enough in Australia, to be frank. You need more Russia experts. But the thing is that, you know, Russia wanted to annex Ukraine politically. The plan was very simple. For Yanukovych to join Eurasian Customs Union, which was disguised as a European Union of the former Soviet republics, and Ukraine would lose its sovereignty peacefully, right? That was kind of the plan. And it was scheduled to happen in 2015. It just never happened because Ukrainian people said, we're not interested, right? And hence, that was a plan. It didn't work, so he invaded. But he wasn't fully prepared. So his intelligence agencies, you know, done this fantastic operation in Crimea, not a single shot made, nobody killed, you know, and Putin was so proud of it. Because a lot of his generals told him, don't do it, but he did it, right? And he said, look, I told you, it worked. It will work again. So all those 8 years, they were getting ready for a much bigger war, quick war, you know, landing in Kyiv, capturing president, killing him, taking over the government, appointing Viktor Medvedchuk, who was Russian agent who, you know, who acted as a Ukrainian politician, would become a president, whoever, run the country, and that's it. And then they would do whatever they wanted. But it didn't work out. And the reason it didn't work out, because once, you know, for 300 years, Russians been underestimating us. Every time, you know, they colonized us many times, but we also were colonized by the Ottomans as well, but we've been colonized by, you know, we've also been part of big Polish-Lithuanian state. So the history is a bit complex, of course. But even if you look at the 20th century, you know, Soviet Union was just an extension of the Russian Empire. And whatever Soviets did, I mean, it's nothing new. You know, Russians did before that. So for us, you know, we were colonized all this time, and we're just fighting, you know, Russia. And Ukrainian people, you know, those 30 years. So our resilience comes from the Ukrainian identity, which Russians do not understand. Because Ukrainian identity was built since Ukraine became independent, gradually. And Ukrainian identity is something, it's a true political identity. You know, we elected a Jewish president who spoke Russian. I want to explain, I mean, say it again. A Jewish president who spoke Russian was elected as the president of Ukraine. You have to understand that it's extraordinary, right? Because people did not even care what language he speaks, what's his ethnic background, if he goes to church or not. What we we wanted to change the system we had in Ukraine, which was corrupt, which had to be changed. We wanted to have a new country, right? And that was the resilience. So what Putin thought, that if you speak Russian, you must be Russian. But once, many times, we proved him wrong. Speaking Russian makes you as Ukrainian as it does. Because if you look at Ukrainian people who are now fighting the Russians and carrying the guns and killing Russians, are Russian speaking. I know it's kind of bizarre, but to give you an idea, these are very different languages. So Russian and Ukrainian is like Dutch and German, for those of you who speak Dutch and German, right? So 60% similarity, 60. Ukrainian has more similarity with Polish language. We've been discussing with my Polish colleague here. But the thing is that Russians believe that if you speak Russian language, you must be Russian.
Yeah, the issue of identity is crucial.
And you all speak English here, by the way, just to remind you.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Some of us struggle. Some of us struggle. Basyl, very, very interesting. I think in terms of identity, not so much in language, but identity across the board. The Philippines, of course, is going through its own challenges and standing up for itself in the South China Sea and General Bautista, it is, I think, with everything else going on in the world, there is a risk that we don't see what's in front of our faces. And so I think we all also have pride in what the Philippines has been doing in the face of aggression and what are effectively hybrid warfare tactics against your own sovereignty. Often the Australian commentary is about what do we have to learn in our own defence strategies from the war in Europe. Do you think that nations in this region, like Australia, should actually be looking not just at Europe but closer to home and looking more at what's happening in the South China Sea, specifically with what China is doing against the Philippines, and not just saying, well, aren't we lucky that there's a hot war in Europe and not in our region?
Yes, but first, my warm greetings to all of you. I bring warm greetings from the Philippines in this cold Canberra weather. It's an honor to be here, to be sharing my thoughts. I'd like to address that, Justin. Thank you also to ASPI for inviting me here. Yes, there's a lot to be learned from the Ukraine situation in Europe, as we have heard from the ambassador. But also, you need to be informed also of what's happening here in the Indo-Pacific, specifically in the South China Sea. You know, China's strategy is similar to that of Russia, employing hybrid warfare techniques preceding the invasion of Ukraine. China wages war similarly, employing, well, if you want to understand Chinese strategic thinking, we can go back to the classic strategists, Sun Tzu and Mao Zedong. You know, Sun Tzu talks about employing other means other than military, economic, social, political, and others to achieve their goal. Mao Zedong also talks about combining armed struggle with other forms of struggle. He talks about the stages in a protracted people's war. Strategic starts with the phase one, followed by phase two, strategic stalemate, strategic offensive. The first phase is strategic defensive. It can graduate to strategic offensive. The first phase, strategic defensive, is when they are inferior to the adversary and they employ hybrid warfare techniques here. Strategic stalemate is when they achieve parity with the adversary. That can easily slide to strategic offensive. So that's Mao Zedong thoughts. The modern nomenclature of these classic strategies are now what we call unrestricted warfare, gray zone warfare, hybrid warfare, and that's what China employs in the West Philippine Sea. Employing means other than the military. Right now, what we see are coercive actions in the West Philippine Sea, illegal, coercive, aggressive actions. What we don't see are the influence operations in the realm of economic, political, social, influencing outcomes of election, exploiting fissures in society, breaking national cohesiveness. So those are the things that we don't see as Ukraine experienced prior to the invasion. Now, can that lead to an invasion, the employment of kinetic military means, as Russia did? If you go back to the protracted People's War, it is possible if you take it from that context. What is important is that China does not graduate from the strategic offensive when they employ means below the threshold of conflict. that they do not graduate to strategic offensive. And what does it take to do that? We need to push back, not necessarily militarily alone, but across the spectrum of the instruments of national power, taking note of how China wages war. For instance, in the battle of narrative, we need to fight back in the battle of narrative, in the challenge to the rules-based international order. We need to challenge the rules-based international order. Right now, the Philippines is a frontliner in that respect. Note that when China seized Scarborough Shoal, we did not employ military to confront China. We went to the court in The Hague. Militarily, there is no contest with China, even economically, but our strength was legal. And we demonstrated we can beat China in the legal field. And we did. And now we want to sustain that, uphold the rules-based international order. That's the peaceful way of resolving conflict, so that it does not graduate to the strategic offensive, so that we are able to restrain China from pursuing their aggressive intent using military force. And while we are out there in the front line defending the rules-based international order, we hope our friends and allies, the rest of the international community, can also support us in that respect. Simply to speak out against the use of force, against violating international law, of upholding the rules-based international order. And we can see the dire consequences if we don't, as we have seen in Ukraine and in Europe. So,
General, I think it's a fabulous description of both what the challenge is and perhaps why democratic countries are failing. What you just set out there is that perhaps for many in the room who have both a passion for and expertise in deterrence, we often talk about deterrence in terms of how do you deter a military invasion. What you're talking about is an absolute desperate need to counter activities below the threshold of war. So your battle of the narrative, your description of the need to take legal action to support the rules-based order, all that is so vital. And obviously, to Philippines' credit, you have been doing that, both in terms of narrative and the law. Do you think that collectively, more nations need to not just support the Philippines, but join in that collective action of narrative and legal action?
Certainly. We hope the international community will speak out in support of the rules-based international order. We want to bear upon China's adherence to international law, and not necessarily to fight against China, but simply to tell China that that is not the right responsible action of a state, and that everybody must adhere to international law. We are simply asking for countries to speak out, our friends and allies, and hopefully including in the Indo-Pacific, including in ASEAN. And, in fact, there are a lot of states who are reluctant to speak out. But we hope that more countries are able to persuade them. Australia, for example, has a big voice and a lot of influence among countries here in the Indo-Pacific. Perhaps we can influence other states to speak out also. Not to confront China militarily, but simply for China to adhere to international law. As we just want to achieve a social pressure so that China will be restrained from employing force and coercive action in its hegemonic ambition. So that's all what we're asking.
Makes sense. I won't go on. I think it's a whole session itself in terms of how we achieve what you are talking about and how we encourage more support and attribution to those types of activities. I think there will probably be a bit of interest in the room, so I'll soon go to the audience for some questions. But Rachel, again, looking towards that next year's defence strategy, it is, I think it should be obvious, but also concerning that not only have we got to prepare a defence force to be able to both deter and actually act in a conflict if deterrence fails, but the hybrid warfare, the digital side, the impact not just on military institutions but society's critical infrastructure, it's almost too big to contemplate. How do you think a government should handle a national defence strategy in the context of the world we have now? Do we stick to a largely military strategy, or do we have to actually look at security and resilience in the context of the vital functioning of Australian society, which means critical infrastructure?
Yeah, I think we absolutely do, and I think it's important actually to celebrate successes. My experience in the cyber world was that the Australian private sector, and actually the global private sector, of whom has many subsidiaries here in Australia, have recognised the need to genuinely partner with government to create that collective defence, where of course it's in their commercial interest, but it's also in our national interest. So one example that I'll give you is that the Australian Signals Directorate has built a cyber threat intelligence sharing platform, which you don't hear them talk about much. This is a world first achievement. What it allows is for Australia and the Five Eyes to basically use its top secret intelligence to develop technical information that are called indicators of compromise and pile them into this platform. What if you choose to be connected to that, and there are a huge number of Australian companies and also Microsoft, so I don't want to creep you all out, but if you have a Microsoft product, it's beaconing back to Seattle all the time, telling Seattle what bad stuff it's seeing. So this is incredibly powerful. What this enables is that Microsoft, some of our big banks, big telcos, also put their threat information in there. Now, if you want to, you can receive that threat information, it's sent to you in machine-readable code, and you can automatically block those threats at your network. So what you literally have there is an incredible example of the government and the private sector working together for our collective defence. And, you know, that is the first game, is to make yourself a hard target, because you hope that they'll move on to the next weaker target, but it also creates a deterrence for actors because the cost of getting in is quite high. It's super important. I think we have to kind of try to work out how we take an example like that and expand that across our collective national security and our national interests, and then do that faster than we have before, with greater energy than we have before, and then trying to, you know, break down all of the barriers that might get in your way. I heard a great quote from Admiral Paparo last week, where he talked about, you know, innovation by, I forget the word, but my word is innovation by extinction. You've got to make extinct all of those barriers that we can put in our own way about innovation. And it's really hard, but we have to do it at speed.
All right, it'll be interesting to see how those elements are captured. Keen to see if there are questions from the crowd, from the audience. I think I can see a hand up corner.
Thank you. Greta Nabs-Keller from the University of Queensland, and thank you to the panel and ASPI. My question pertains to the battle of the narratives and how to counter influence operations, whether they'll be Chinese or Russian or others, without giving away any secrets. I wonder if the panel can just comment on how you counter that tsunami of concerted disinformation that's, aims at attacking a society and social cohesion.
Sure. I'll give you a very simplistic answer, and then I'll explain. You can't. And you're already losing, by the way.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. Because, I spent 5 years professionally, fighting Russian disinformation. And I realized that you just can't do it. It's still, just give you an example. Once Russia comes up with something, it doesn't matter what, half-truths, mixed, twisted, it's out there, reaching millions and millions of people. Your counter-argument reaches a small fraction of those people. As long as you're a democracy, you can't do it. Only dictatorships can do it. Only authoritarian regimes can do it. They can firewall, like China does, totally firewalled and totally controlling the media space. That's the only way how you can protect yourself from external influence. If you're a democracy, if you have freedom of speech, you just can't do it. And, I've said it many times here, but you've lost Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia believes in Chinese/Russian narrative of the war in Ukraine, of the Russia's war in Ukraine, right? Because punishing, China starts with punishing Russia. If Russia can do it, why China cannot do it? Both have nuclear weapons. Both are permanent members of the UN Security Council. So if Russia can do it, China can do it, and they can just take over whatever they want because they have nuclear weapons. That's the whole point. We get into that stage, and how do we deal with that? But on the disinformation side, the problem is, look at Africa, look at Latin America, many countries in Latin America, not all of them, there are some exceptions, Middle East, and Asia. Look at India. India believes in the Russian narrative, primarily, unfortunately, for different reasons. Benefiting from trading their oil, selling, Russian oil, processing it there, selling it to the European Union, selling it to Australia, and whatnot. Indonesia. We shouldn't mention Indonesia, right?
Sure.
Look, go and ask Indonesians what they think about Russia's war in Ukraine. What will you hear? Go and ask them. I'm just very curious.
That's what really break in there to bring the general in the commentary around Southeast Asia. And I think
Philippines is an exception.
Philippines, obviously, obviously the exception. But the general himself went to that point around there being not enough support. And I think the battle of the narrative means if we're going to be singular in the narrative, we're going to lose to China and Russia. But General, does the ambassador's point ring true? Would you be looking for Southeast Asia to do more to help the Philippines with its narrative battle?
For one, I agree with the ambassador. It's so difficult to fight disinformation. But to a certain degree, we can try to, in some tactical situations, we can. In the West Philippine Sea, what we do is tell the world what China is doing live. As China does the water cannon and ramming activities against our fishermen, even our Coast Guard, civilian vessels. We tell the world what's happening in the West Philippine Sea, employing the media, for one. While, yes, in a democracy, the media, is one instrument that can be used against you in the disinformation. We also have the liberty, the freedom to use media to tell the truth. What China is doing in the South China Sea, it's coercive activities. Some of them China denies, but the report, the videos, the live coverage of all of these activities, China cannot deny. Of course, they just twist it to according to their narrative about their own interpretation of what international law is. China even created their own mediation facility in Hong Kong to rival the one in The Hague. So,
Rachel, you have extensive experience with countering information operations, the online world, the battle of the narrative. Are you as pessimistic as the ambassador? And as a bit of a follow-up to that, the ambassador has a couple of times referenced both China and Russia. Have you think one of the things that has surprised Western governments is how aligned they have become?
Well, unfortunately, I am as pessimistic as the ambassador, because I think it does boil down to what we stand for and who we are, and it is democracy, which is rich and vibrant and messy and full of all sorts of different messages, versus dictatorship. I also, worry about what's now. It's tempting to say in the future, but I think it's now, and I think the ambassador touched on this, that the sort of bifurcation of the internet is happening, and where that leaves the West is that our computers that do AI and machine learning and large language models are learning on that part of the internet that is available to us, whereas China and Russia, because they're shut off to us, whereas China and Russia have the benefit of their own learning plus what they can access in our democracies. So we have to think deeply about the disadvantage that places us in, and how we can and maybe should be using technology to overcome that. I don't think it's impossible, but it's certainly placing us at a disadvantage. And I think the only way that you have any hope in the future of countering disinformation that is happening out of these troll farms at the speed and scale at which it's happening is being capable of using artificial intelligence to counter it, but we have one arm tied behind our back at the moment.
Let me pitch in, Justin. Yes, it's really a tough battle, the battle of narratives, the battle of disinformation. But we cannot simply concede. We need to fight back. The best way is to do it collectively. We can still dominate the battle for information. After all, who invented internet and who invented the AI? I mean, collectively, as a community of nations, believing in truth, in democracy, in the rule of law, we need to fight back.
But it's I would give you one example. So, independent film festival called Antenna in Sydney, earlier this year showed a Russian propaganda film, right? And I went, Russians at War, that's the name of the movie. Watch it to have your own opinion. But Russians at War is a movie which was produced by a former producer of Russia Today, who allegedly was embedded for 9 months or 7 months with Russian troops in Ukraine, claiming that she was still a journalist, making a documentary and publishing the documentary in Canada, Switzerland, whatever, and took it to different festivals, including Antenna Film Festival. And I had a meeting with John Graham, the minister in NSW government, Minister of Arts, and I had to explain to him how Russian propaganda works. And I was amazed he didn't understand it at all. And in a way, I don't blame him, because he's never dealt with Russian disinformation as a state-level politician. But I've explained to him the way it works and the way a malign foreign influence in the form of a documentary can really change their understanding of what is happening. Because I've explained that the minute you're at a film festival Next stage, you will be on ABC. Next stage, you will be on SBS. Next stage, you're going to be another public broadcast in Canada, public broadcast in America, and public broadcast in Britain. Because the way festivals work, this is where public broadcasters buy their documentaries. And if you've done Toronto, you've done Antenna, you've done Cannes Festival, you get it to public broadcaster, and all of a sudden, you see a Russian intelligence, military intelligence, who created the documentary. It was created by Russian military intelligence, because you have to understand that not a single journalist has any access to the Russian troops in Ukraine unless it's sanctioned by Russian military intelligence. You cannot pretend, and she's actually wearing a war fatigue in that movie. You will not believe it. She's wearing war fatigue, claiming to be a journalist, talking to the Russian people and how their families are suffering because they're so busy killing Ukrainians and raping Ukrainian women. You know, you will not believe it, and it was here in Sydney. And of course, only several hundred people saw it. It's like nobody cares about festivals. But the minute it's on the public broadcast, it's going to be a different story. And he couldn't get it. He just couldn't get it. I said, look, I will take it with, with your federal government, because it's a matter for federal government, not for your state government to deal with that. So here is my pitch. You do it. And we have to deal with that. We have to be very careful of how Russians work. Ask your Chinese citizens here, and I know Chinese come from all different parts of China during the history. There is gold mines, all of that. Different Chinese live in Australia. But if you ask Chinese, survey, Chinese, Australians of Chinese background, who started the war in Ukraine? When I came here, I saw an analysis from Baidu in Australia, which secondly said, Chinese people on Baidu in Australia believe in Chinese narrative of who started the war. NATO started the war. And it's really extraordinary, because this is what maybe 800,000 people, I don't know how many. I mean, there are exceptions certainly, but I'm just saying that it's actually, to demonstrate that it's so easy to penetrate your media space, and it's very easy to manipulate, especially with artificial intelligence. You can really create many, many different websites which will look like legitimate media, which will promote a narrative. With all this augmented reality, you can have a voice of your prime minister who will look like a prime minister, making a statement, but it was not your prime minister, it was all artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and then somebody writes a story about it, and it's picked up, and then it's all over, and it's too late. It was total hoax, but all of a sudden you undermine, because the purpose of propaganda is not to convince you of somebody's opinion. The purpose of propaganda is to confuse you, to muddy the waters, and undermine trust towards conventional media, towards your government. And once that trust is undermined, the malign foreign force can do whatever they want, because people are confused. They don't understand who is the enemy and who is not. And democracies are very vulnerable. We see what's happening in other democracies in Europe, what's happening in North America, right? It's so easy to manipulate it, because look at all these migrants who came to Europe. When Bashar al-Assad was supported by the Russians, one of the positive externalities for the Russians was those 1 million migrants who came to Germany, because this is exactly what has empowered, alternative for Germany. Those were the migrants. 5 million Ukrainian DPs in Europe are now empowering far-right parties all over Europe, who are winning different countries in different parts of Europe. Because migrant issue is an issue. And 5 million Ukrainians who didn't want to go to Europe, but were forced by Russians to go there, are creating the environment where different parties come to power, who change politics, who want to dismantle European Union, and who want to undermine the security of Europe. This is just crazy, but this is happening as we speak.
No, it is, and it's been like that for a long time in terms of the power of propaganda. I think a lot of people who grew up in the 80s still are the ones who think that CIA shot Kennedy simply because they watched Oliver Stone's movie JFK, and many of them don't know what Oliver Stone is now known as. And it's been supercharged by, that was in the era of television and film, and now we've had social media and, as Rachel said, AI. If anyone wants to be scared by AI even more than you are, I encourage you to listen to a podcast that Dave Rowe did with Conor Lay, who's the CEO of Conjecture. Really quite worrying. Any further questions down the back?
Thank you. I'm Raji Rajagopalan. I'm a resident senior fellow at the ASPI. Fantastic speakers and the great set of comments. Given that we have speakers from both Europe and the Indo-Pacific, my question was, there are lots of different threats that are playing out in the Indo-Pacific and the European region that require the US to play the role of a balancer. But this also brings in questions like burden sharing and how is this being considered by smaller powers in terms of what they would contribute and so on and so forth. But considering how serious the situation is in both regions, Indo-Pacific and Europe, how are the various countries thinking about it, both from a Washington perspective, but also if there is any perspective that can be given from from the US perspective, but also in terms of how Europe, Indo-Pacific, and Australia are looking to contribute in terms of that burden sharing question. Because I think we all want the US to play that balancing role, but I think especially under the current times, you are seeing a larger burden sharing to be undertaken by the partners and allies. So how would this play out? Thank you.
Who wants to tackle that?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'll be really quick because I know we're almost out of time. I'm a passionate supporter of our alliance with the United States, of course, and not many people know that in World War II, it was Australian signals intelligence that led to the shooting down of Admiral Yamamoto's plane, who was the architect responsible for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and it was a bunch of women that did it. So just sort of park that. So we have this 80 years of incredible, deep history. And from that point in World War II, the Five Eyes Alliance did, certainly in signals intelligence, divided the world and genuinely burden shared, not only on intelligence collection, but on the capabilities that are built beneath that. And in the course of my career, I've worked with incredibly professional, passionate, mission-driven Americans who are, sort of the embodiment of the rather corny for an Australian audience, but the embodiment of patriots that, genuinely apolitical, mission-driven professionals. So I really, believe profoundly that none of that will change as quickly as some people believe it might. I also think, though, Australia has to be able to walk and chew gum, to use an American term. So we must also, at the same time, pursue much deeper, more profound partnerships with other friends, allies, with whom we need to take risks to share more and develop more capability together. We need more friends.
Perfect. I might, we've got a flashing light here saying time, and people have stayed all the way through, but I might just ask a very quick 30-second answer from all of you on just a separate question, but all looking forward. Rachel, following on from what you were just talking about in the question on the US, in the 2024 last year's National Defence Strategy, Minister Miles in his forward said, the US remains fundamental to Australia's security. We will continue to deepen and expand our defence engagement with the US. The opening chapter of that National Defence Strategy said Australia must work even more closely with the US. So do you think next year's strategy will have that exact same language?
Well, I don't know about the future strategy. My view is, I think, of course, Mr. Miles is right, and we also need to put a lot of effort into friendships, allies and partners with other nations as well. Yeah.
Ambassador Vasyl, the war that many thought would last between 3 days and 3 weeks is well over 3 years. Do you think the war is going to end anytime soon?
I wish it did, but I don't think it's going to happen. And here is, something I wanted to share with your audience here based on, kind of theme that was discussed here. As you know, I've stayed here for the whole day, taking notes and listening. And, I think, we still need Australian support, and we will always remember that. We will never forget it. And, but, 3 years ago when I arrived here, some politicians in Australia would say that a war is a long way away. 3 years later, I believe that actually war is very close to Australia. I already said it publicly, I'm just repeating that. secondly, what we've learned as a Ukrainians fighting for our survival is not what you need in Australia. So I'm convinced that now, well, we still need your help, Bushmasters, Hawkeyes, artillery, drones, and other equipment. You now need us more than we need you. Very simple. Because asymmetric warfare, new capabilities, how we use them. You remember, you've seen that underwater drone shooting down Russian fighter jet, right? 5 weeks ago. Whatever happened this weekend, you've seen it. We again blew up the bridge, not entirely. Hopefully we will get luckier next time. But what we are capable of doing, this is what Australia needs. You're a middle power. You're not a superpower. So if you are facing a bigger enemy, you need to know how to do this asymmetric warfare. And I'm convinced that we can help you. We can help you now more than you can even imagine what a return on investment you're going to get with $1.5 billion of assistance to Ukraine. Certainly there could be more, could be done. I'm not speaking about commodity prices. You've seen them going up during the past 3 years. But I think you could do more. And I just hope that the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese goes to Ukraine this European summer to get that commitment from Ukraine to help Australian defense forces and your intelligence agencies to become as good as we are.
Thank you. General, finally to you, you strongly said that we just have to fight. There's no option, we have to fight, whether it be the Philippines or Philippines' friends and partners. Do you think that the deterrence of conflict in the South China Sea is possible?
Is possible? Sure, certainly it is possible if all of us get together, if the international community gets together and impress upon China that this is the way to go. We simply have to abide by the rules, by international law. I doubt whether China will pursue its aggressive behavior if all of us speaks out against it. And the need for us to really get together as a community of nations, as allies, to accomplish that.
Excellent. Let's hope we do. And that positivity might be a good way to finish. Please join with me in thanking a great panel.